I ask many refugees, they have the same nightmare.
Really?
You wake up in the country, like for example, for me, Algeria, and I don't have my passport with me. I'm like, how did I come here? And you start to remember, now I need to save money again. I need to go through the sea again. It's horrible. And I saw dog. He was responsible for the police. I was like, what, dog? Why are you sending me back? Really, I don't know why. Your face was there.
I'm so sorry.
Ah.
Welcome to the second part of our Fractured podcast on the situation on Lesvos. We are talking to two experts that give us an overlook of the current situation on the island. We have Lorraine Leete with us, who's a lawyer and coordinator of Legal Centre Lesvos, and we have Silvia Lucibello, who is a field coordinator at Parea Community Center, and she is also a member of Europe Cares. Welcome very much back to the show.
Here. So to both our guests, our amazing guests. So in 2015, this wave of refugees started coming to the islands, and the locals welcomed them with open arms and they helped them. 8 years later, that changed completely. So I want to know what created this mess and who's responsible for this change.
You want to go first, Silvia?
I can start. I think it is really difficult to find one reason why this happened. I think it's a very complex question, although a very interesting one. I think one of the biggest problems was the way the situation was handled. So the feeling from the local community was that the situation was not being handled, was not under control. And you could see this because actually the number of arrivals were super high. At some point there were 500,000 people in an island of 100,000 people. So the numbers were really, really high on an island, which it is true, it's always been a place where migrants were coming because of its proximity to Turkey, because of its position in the Aegean Sea, but still it was a small Greek island that was clearly not ready for this. And the situation was handled exactly in a controlled way. I think the feeling of the local community was that, first of all, this was a situation which was not under control and was a very protracted situation. It didn't just last for a few months, but it continued for years. And I think there was always this feeling of being left alone. As an Italian, I think this is a feeling that I can understand because it's a very common feeling, I think, among the southern European countries. The feeling that in the end the problem is left to you. That we talk a lot about European solidarity, but the reality is that very often southern countries are those, due to the Dublin system, left to having to deal with new arrivals, having to deal with the procedure of the request for international protection, and in the meantime having to navigate the situation. So I think this was a feeling that was shared by many, also in a situation where many Greeks were also still recovering from the economic crisis, so not necessarily in the best situation. And the problem to me is also that the local community didn't feel particularly heard or listened when then certain decisions were made, when new policies were applied. It felt, I believe it felt a lot that these were things that were just decided from above them without ever consulting and trying to understand what were the feeling of the local community and how to also create a system that would also consider them and would make it possible to collaborate together. So I think this built up. There were a lot of frustrations that built up, and probably they never felt like anybody actually cared about what they thought, how they felt, and it's just a situation that at some point exploded. When you have then the fascist attacks from many people from the island, but also people traveling from Greece and actively attacking camp residents, but also people being in solidarity to migrants in the beginning of 2020. So yeah, I believe it's many different points. In a certain way, I understand the local community. I understand from where this is coming. I think many things could have been done differently, and I believe that right now the feeling is mostly of tiredness. Very often when I speak with the locals, I feel that they are not even interested in this topic anymore. They don't want to know if there is still a camp. Some of them are even happy if the Vastria camp is built, because out of sight, out of mind, and generally they don't seem to be so much bothered anymore by this topic. But I do believe that it would be great if it would be possible to find another way, also involving the local community and really uplifting them, because they've been really a great help at the very beginning of the crisis, and they've given a huge proof of how charitable and helpful they can be when there was a huge need.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Silvia has explained all the different dimensions and why it's so complex. And of course, you know, the local population is not a homogenous population. There are still members of and groups from the local population who are still in solidarity with migrants. So yeah, it's always difficult to talk about a population as if it's a homogenous group. Just to add a few points, I mean, I think what is clear, and Silvia already mentioned it, is that this was a created crisis by European Union policies, which were then implemented by Greece, of trapping people on the island. So I think also in 2015, beginning of 2016, when there was a lot more solidarity, Lesvos was also, as a transit zone. So people were passing through the island, but they weren't forced to stay here. So you didn't see the same resentment, growing tensions building up of people who were trapped on the island, sometimes for years. And the growing population of people being trapped here, which reached a peak of over 20,000 people at the beginning of 2020, which was a direct result of the new Greek government policy of stopping any transfers from the islands, which happened through the last half of 2019 and led to this kind of explosion of the local population against the migrant population and those in solidarity with them. And I think this was a misdirected resentment. It's always easy to scapegoat foreigners for problems which are actually created by the government. And this happened as well because of local political leaders who actually stoked this resentment and directed people's anger at the situation, at the economic crisis that they were facing towards a foreign population, which is what we see in many places of the world with the rise of far-right fascist regimes that are using the economic crisis to direct towards implementing more and more anti-migrant policies. There's a lot more that can be said, but I think Silvia covered most of those issues as well.
Silvia, I want to go back to you and ask you a little bit about the situation with the new camp. So you guys in Parea, you basically face the current camp, the Mavrovouni reception center, but the government is planning to open a new camp. The construction has started. We know that there are legal challenges to it, and maybe I will ask more about this to Lorraine in a moment. But Silvia, I would like to know also from you, from your perspective, the community you're serving, what is your position on this new camp, which is pretty far away from where you are now? What are you hearing from people who may be moved to this very remote place?
First of all, there is a lot of fear and uncertainty, which generally I think is one of the most common feelings when you are part of people on the move, when you apply for asylum in Greece. There are a lot of different rumors about when the camp will be open, whether it will be open and how it will look like. People are really confused. They don't know what to expect. They don't know whether this will happen, but everybody sees this as generally a worsened a worst case scenario, because it means moving very far away from the major city on the island, Mytilene, where you also have access to the only hospital of the island, and many basic needs that many of the camp residents need. And it also means having a lot of difficulties in traveling, because we know that the transportation on Lesvos and generally in Greece is not the best. By car it's going to take up to 1 hour, by bus even longer. Not everybody has the financial possibility to buy a ticket and go anytime they want to go, and most importantly, it's not going to be clear even if people will be allowed to go out and how and when, because again it's going to be a highly militarized camp with a lot of surveillance, with cameras everywhere. It's not going to be so easy to go out anymore, and this means that the presence of NGOs will also be lowered. These are things that people fear, because already in the camp, in the Mavrovouni camp, since it was registered as a CCAC, closed and controlled access camp, in January of this year, we could see a huge change in the way things were dealt. Many NGOs were kicked out of this camp and other camps in Greece in general, because they're not registered with the Ministry of Migration, which meant a gap in the basic needs and generally psychosocial support and medical support that were never filled in by the government or any other state authorities. And this also means that when you don't have NGOs inside, you also have less people that are witnessing what's going on and what kind of violations are being committed by the police, by the security service and all the authorities that are inside. So generally people are really scared. They don't know what to expect. They don't know when this will happen, and there is a fear whenever we start to talk about Camp Vastria again, there are news, everybody starts to think about, okay, I want to leave, I want to go to the mainland or anywhere else in Greece, because nobody wants to be moved there. And this also creates a huge uncertainty for us, for the NGOs working outside of the camps. Most of us either cannot go in the camp because we lack the registration and all the administrative aspects that were required, but also for political reasons. For instance, Europe Cares is not interested in working inside of a prison-like camp like Mavrovouni or Vastria. And at the same time, we don't know what's going to happen if the new camp is going to be open. Obviously, all our operations will need to be reconsidered, replanned, and this makes it really difficult to plan ahead and to really make sure that we are there for the people when they need it and in the way they need it, which is our core mission. So yeah, really complex situation, both for people on the move and people in solidarity with them.
Lorraine, very fast to you. If you have this knowledge about Vastria, the camp, actually the road to the camp was legally challenged in the court, right? Do you have any additional information about that?
Yeah, not just the road to the camp, but the camp itself. And actually the latest court decision regarding that was from the highest administrative court in Greece, which found that there wasn't the proper environmental impact assessment for the camp itself, and that construction should be suspended. But what the Ministry of Migration announced the next day, I think even, or maybe the next week, was that construction would continue, that they would have all of the assessments in place by the time it was operational, and that this camp, which by the way is, the European Commission is holding this camp as if it's a model camp, so it has all of the political support as well of the European Commission that this camp will open, that it will be operational, despite even court decisions saying that they don't have the proper environmental impact assessment. And this environmental impact assessment is especially important in this case because they're building this camp in the middle of a pine forest. In the middle of a pine forest, which every year there's forest fires in Greece, which make the international news because of the devastation they cause. Fires are inherent in refugee camps. I mean, this is something we've seen over the years, that because there's always a lack of access to electricity, there's always a lack of access to edible food, there's always tensions caused by incarcerating people in concentrated conditions. This leads to fires in all of these scenarios. So imagine that in the middle of the largest pine forest on the island, they're building a refugee camp, which could cause serious environmental destruction and destruction of human life, of everyone who's forced to live there. Just another comment on that as part of European migration policy, why this camp is so important is not only that it will be continued detention, de facto open air prison for people arriving here, but they're also within this camp have announced that there will be capacity for over 2,000, maybe even 3,000 people to be detained awaiting deportation. So this means inside the camp there will also be a detention center with the express purpose of holding people until they're deported to Turkey. So this is actually the future we are trying to fight against, which seems like it's inevitable in the next year on the island.
It's a prison inside the prison.
I think what's pretty interesting is that the local community is actually against this, and there have been several protests where actually you saw different sides of the story coming together. So you had from one side the people in solidarity, and on the other side the people that are mostly against the idea of having migrants and refugees on the island in general, and they came together in several protests in the past. And I find it really interesting that there is this very strong political will to impose this decision and to make it happen, and almost 80 million euros of the European Union were invested in it, but at the same time you have a very strong voice from the local community that is very much against it, but it's just being silenced or completely ignored, despite the fact that in the past there were a lot of tensions between the local community and the camp residents, and that ended pretty badly, especially in 2020. So yeah, that is also an unfolding crisis that we might see escalating if the new camp is open, I think.
The discussion is absolutely fascinating, interesting, and super informative. So I'm very sad to say that we have to take a super short break, and we will be right back.
Parea Lesvos is a safe space for people on the move, especially residing in the refugee camp on Lesvos, but also more generally any members of the local community that might be in need. And first of all, Parea, as the name itself in Greek means, is a community, a circle of friends, a company. For us, Parea is a space where people can come freely, they're always welcome, our gates are always open, and they can find a place where people stand in solidarity with them. Not only they can have access to basic needs, education, psychosocial and legal support, but they can also, first of all, find a place where people are there to listen to them, to support them, and to remind them that they are people, first of all. Before being refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, or any other label that might be used to describe them, we want to remind them, first of all, that they are human beings, and as such, they deserve care, love, and attention like anyone else.
Silvia, Lorraine, we were talking about the situation with the new camp, but since we're there, I want to ask you a little bit about the old camp. So, Lorraine, Moria, the infamous Moria camp on Lesvos that burned down. You guys are engaged in a legal representation of people, several Afghans who have been arrested for this event. And I'm going to give it straight to you. I have very strong opinions on that. We participated in several actions to document the situation. What is the situation on this trial right now?
Yes, so lawyers from our office are actually representing the 6 Afghan teenagers who were arrested that time. They have all been convicted of arson with risk to human life. 2 of them were tried as minors, so they were 2 people who the Greek state recognized were under 18. 1 has now been released. They already had their appeal trial, the 2 who were arrested as minors. On appeal, it was confirmed again their guilty conviction. So they had their sentence reduced somewhat, but they were still found guilty of having caused this fire. And I'll get a bit to the evidence against them, which is really minimal and not credible. 1 has now been released. The other has been released from prison, but he actually hasn't been released. He's not free because he was immediately transferred from prison, criminal detention, to administrative detention as an asylum seeker. On one of the grounds of detention for people seeking asylum in Greece is if you're thought to be a public security risk. This means people who sometimes have no criminal charges against them or who have already served their prison time, which is dictated by the state, as was the case for this individual. He's already finished his prison sentence, but he's still not free because the Greek authorities now are saying he's a risk to public security. So he's now in an administrative detention center for migrants on mainland Greece. The procedural case of the minors, we've appealed to the Supreme Court. We're awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court, but we're not too optimistic because the prosecutor of the Supreme Court reconfirmed what the lower two courts said, found that these two people should be found guilty. So we're not too optimistic, but pending this decision, we also intend to take it to the European Court of Human Rights because these two individuals and also the other four whose procedural case I'll get to in a minute, they were convicted, all of them based on, except for one, based on the testimony of one individual who was the Afghan community leader at the time, one of the Afghan community leaders at the time, who gave 6 common first names and said these are the 6 people who are guilty of setting the fire. And this person, he disappeared after giving this testimony to the police. There are people who said he was transferred very quickly off the island and that he's now in Germany. But he never appeared again in court. So these people were convicted based on a written testimony that was signed by him. The lawyers from our team were not able to cross-examine him. He was from a different ethnic minority of those who were convicted. All 6 of the teenagers are Hazara, and they were targeted by someone who is from an ethnic majority in Afghanistan who is also persecuting Hazara in Afghanistan. So it's a very complex issue, but they're just to say that there would have been other motives for him to potentially name these 6 people other than the fact that he saw them set a fire, and the fact that this is very flimsy evidence in order to send people to prison for many, many years. There was no other evidence which showed that these 6 teenagers had set the fire besides this testimony. One of the other 6 was convicted on the basis of a police officer testimony who said that he could recognize the boy from the back based on a video that was taken of the boys getting onto a plane when many of the unaccompanied minors were being evacuated from the island following the fire. And he said he recognized him based on his haircut. I mean, this is something that we joke about because in Moria, everyone talks about the Moria haircut. Of all the young men and boys in Moria had the hair shaved on the sides, a little bit longer on top. And to say that you can recognize someone based on this haircut is really ridiculous for anyone who knows anything about Moria. So back to what has happened procedurally for the other 4, they were tried as adults despite the fact that 3 of them were actually minors, had national identity documents and some even passports from Afghanistan showing that they were minors. But the Greek authorities, and again Frontex, as we mentioned earlier, had registered them as adults despite this fact. We've now gotten birth certificates certified from the Afghan embassy in Athens, confirming that they were minors when they were arrested. But we haven't been able to even present this evidence because after their conviction, in the first instance in which they were sentenced, the appeal has been repeatedly postponed. So we haven't been able to present this evidence showing that they were actually minors, so were tried in the wrong court. And also the very important evidence which Refocus Media also contributed to, which was a reconstruction of the fire, which used all of the footage that you and your team collected during the fire, which was pieced together by forensic architecture, and actually demonstrated that what this one witness had testified in terms of where the fire was and where these boys were when they supposedly set the fire, that this actually couldn't have happened because of all the different video evidence that was collected by your team, which demonstrated in which areas of the camp the fire actually started, and given the wind conditions this night, how it spread to other areas of the camp, which demonstrated this that even further than the other reasons why we have reason to doubt this testimony, showing that this testimony couldn't actually be what happened this night. So both of these very important pieces of evidence we're still waiting to present, and meanwhile these four young men are still in prison. Now the trial has been postponed, the appeal trial has been postponed to March this coming year, so we hope that again we can get the kind of international attention and international monitors so that these young men can hopefully finally be freed. But this case, I think, demonstrates a lot of things about the problems of the criminal justice system here in Greece, but also shows how the government is very quick to scapegoat migrants for crimes that are actually crimes of the state. So, I mean, we all know Moria itself is the crime, not the fire that destroyed it. And this is, swept under the rug, and new camps are built, and we see the same problems resurfacing. But, I mean, I think looking at the analogous situation of the disaster, the massacre of over 600 people this summer in a shipwreck in off the coast of Greece. Again, in this case, it was 9 survivors, people who survived this horrible shipwreck, which so many people were killed in, who are now facing criminal charges for the shipwreck, when all the evidence that's coming out is showing that it was actually Greek authorities who contributed to this shipwreck by not conducting search and rescue activities, and maybe even caused the boat to sink by attempting to tow it in what is very consistent, which is policy at sea of trying to tow people back to Turkey, push people back, prevent people from arriving to safety.
When it comes to the fire of Moria, I would very much like to encourage people who are interested in it to check our episode 4 of season 2, where we are actually discussing with forensic architecture the whole process of how they investigated it. In the show notes, if anybody's interested, you can see the piece that forensic architecture made. And we actually named this that episode Disaster Designed, because Moria was designed for a disaster like that. Absolutely.
I have a question for Silvia. I read lately an article where they interviewed a nurse that volunteered with an NGO there, and she said that the worst medical issue she sees among refugees is PTSD because of the traumatic journey, because of the issues there. Is there any psychological help for these people? I know of an NGO that's called Epapsy. I don't know if they are there or not. I know they are in Samos, but I don't know if they are in Lesvos.
Sorry, say it again, the name of the organization?
Epapsy. Epapsy.
No, I don't think they're present on Lesvos. As long as I know, on Lesvos there are 5 to 6 organizations that are offering psychosocial support to different target groups. And as you very well said, generally there is a huge need for this kind of support. So yeah, generally there are many kind of different situations in the camp, but all the camp residents, or most of them, are in real need of psychosocial support. There are different obstacles though. First of all, that the numbers are as high as more than 4,000 people, so of course there's never going to be enough support for all of them. Many organizations at the moment are trying to do their best and offering especially support to people that might be going through suicidal attempts or more kind of severe conditions. However, very often there is not enough for everyone. At the same time, some NGOs are also downsizing or leaving the island, meaning that the capacity is even lower. We find ourselves in a situation where, especially in the last months, we saw a lot of difficult situations. We mostly work in Parea with single men, which is a very interesting category because very often they're not considered vulnerable people. They're always a little bit left at the end of the supply chain of the humanitarian and generally any kind of support that is offered. However, they're in huge need as well. And the difficulty with single men or generally men is that very often they are struggling to ask for help. Because there is a huge stigma around mental health as well in their home country, in their cultures. However, what we realize is that there is a huge need for that, and that very often there is not enough offer, there is not enough capacity. We recently had to refer several situations that were suspected suicidal cases. However, the reply was that unless we are 100% sure that these people want to commit suicide, we cannot refer them, let's say, to the medical actors, but they have to wait. They had to keep in line and wait for their turn, which is also absolutely understandable when NGOs are dealing with so much, when there are only 2 doctors in the camp and absolutely not enough workers and generally capacity as needed. But at the same time, this creates also a huge worry to all of us. We in our center see so many difficult situations every day, and we try to refer, we try to signal this to our colleagues, but very often we know that there is not enough capacity to help everyone. For instance, recently we also received some requests from some medical actors asking us to help them as much as possible, for instance by developing some kind of exercises or courses to help people deal with psychosomatic pain. So a lot of people are having this kind of pain, but because the situation is not so severe, there is not enough capacity to support them. So we're also being asked, despite not being medical, let's say, experts, we are being asked as much as possible to support, and we're trying to do so. But yeah, everybody is in need, and there will never be enough support for everyone. There is a very ugly reality, and there is also always the fear that disclosing certain information might have negative consequences on the legal case. So there is also a lot of resistance, which is really difficult to help people open up. So in general, I think that it is really important as part of our work in our community center is also to create a space where people can feel comfortable and like they can open up and they can ask for help. And there is for them always the possibility to refer them to someone else and do our best to support them.
And I would just add to that if you're finished, Silvia.
Yes, sure.
Just that, I mean, because you mentioned at the beginning PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, this is something that we've consistently see develop on the island for people who are forced to live here. Not everyone who passes through a trauma develops PTSD, but if you pass through a trauma and you don't have a safe, structured environment around you that allows you to process that trauma and to heal from that trauma, you will develop PTSD. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but this is, I mean, you know, generalizing a lot on how PTSD develops, but it's no surprise that everyone who arrives here across the sea from Turkey has passed through a traumatic event, just because the journey itself is traumatic. And then you're put in a camp with all the conditions that Silvia was describing earlier. It is almost inevitable that you will develop PTSD because you don't have a safe environment to process what has happened to you and what you've gone through. So this is actually something that's caused not by the trauma that people have already arrived here with, but because of the conditions people are forced to live in when they are here.
Thank you very much for clarifying this situation for us. I want to remind everybody that volunteers on Lesvos in the north, in Skala Kamena, were at some point nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their activity for refugees, for the fishermen who were taking their boats out in the sea and bringing refugees back to the shore. Were nominated for this Peace Prize. And with everything that is going on right now, we also cannot forget about this beautiful gesture of solidarity. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode. We would like to remind everybody about the thumbs ups and comments to help us fight the algorithm on Spotify, YouTube,
also they can
Amazon
suggest
podcast.
they can suggest topics that we could
and
speak about.
We would like to encourage everybody, write us in a comment what would you like us to talk more about, go deeper into certain subjects. We would be very happy to invite guests to our studio or online to join us. And of course, remember about our fundraising campaigns. You will find links to them in the show notes. We will very, very greatly appreciate your support. See you next time. Lesvos cameras too, both.
Okay. Rolling. Sound speeding. Action.
Okay, Doug out of the picture.
Not action.